So what's the concept behind this whole fat cycling thing, and why is it useful if we want to go from our baseline to more of a peak mode, or essentially keep that fat loss occurring over time? So let's just think about the metabolism for a moment. If we imagine that when we are going through beta oxidation, which is the breakdown of our own body fat, we have a certain amount of enzymes that are required to be able to do this process. Let's just pull a number out of the sky. Let's imagine that we have 100 enzymes to be able to break down our body fat. If you were to decrease the amount of food that you're eating for a little bit of time, say you go on a bit of a deficit, which you require to be able to do to be able to lose body fat. Say you're eating a little bit less. Now, as human beings, we've evolved to be able to cope with this, and this is a really smart and effective mechanism to avoid death in the wild. Essentially, if we are eating less, our body is going to think, okay, well, there's just not as much food availability, so let's just decrease our metabolism slightly so that if we continue to have not as much food, we don't die and we don't eventually just waste away. So it's going to decrease everything and bring things down to a bit more of a slower level. So let's say we brought those enzymes from 100 down to say like 20 or 50. As you can imagine, your metabolism has slowed down because you don't have as many enzymes to be able to break down that fat, and things are happening a lot slower. This is going to happen over time when you're in deficit. What happens though if you were to increase your intake? Say you have suddenly eaten a huge amount. You know the feeling of when you've gone out to dinner and you eat more than you usually would. Say you have a really huge amount of meat and you get the meat sweats. You suddenly have, this heat occurring in your body, and the next day you almost feel hungrier than you usually do. Why is that? Well, in the opposite way, if your body suddenly gets more food, it's going to have to increase its enzymatic production because it needs to be able to deal with that food. It needs to be able to put that somewhere. It needs to be able to do something with it. So we'll increase the production of those enzymes so that we can break down what we're eating and do something with it, make energy with it. You suddenly have a bit more energy, you have a lot more heat in your body, and essentially those enzymes are put to good use. So say we've gone from 100 enzymes to 10,000 enzymes. As you can imagine, your metabolism has increased. It's gone to a higher level to be able to deal with that fat. So this is essentially what's behind fat cycling. It's essentially tricking your body into thinking that it's getting more than it is actually getting some days to be able to increase and manipulate our metabolism. This is also useful doing it with fat as opposed to carbohydrates, because essentially it keeps our fat loss hormones in a certain level. So for example, insulin, which is going to make us hold on to body fat, if we only do this mainly via fat, then we're not increasing our insulin and stopping ourselves from being able to break down that fat. And fat is also more useful in creating things like hormones, which are also useful in order to be able to increase our metabolism. So it's more important to be able to do this via fat manipulation as opposed to carbohydrate manipulation. What's the difference between fat cycling and, for example, fasting? The difference with fasting, and of course it's going to depend on what type of fasting you're doing. Just bear in mind that the fasting that we are advocates for with the Essentialist program is more like TRE, which is time restricted eating. And that's not really fasting. When I talk about fasting, I'm more talking about, you might do 24 to 48 hours of actually just not bringing in any food. Now, the difference here is that if you are doing that sort of fasting, yes, you are decreasing the amount that you're eating. And then when you do break the fast, you're decreasing the amount you're eating, and then you're increasing it when you do break your fast. The problem I have with this is two problems. In that time that you are not eating for a couple of days, you're not bringing in any protein. And in that time, and this is going to be more of a problem if you are leaner, you are essentially more likely to break down the protein that you have in your body because you might be getting low on the fat that you have available. The more body fat you have on your body, the less likely it is that you're going to use your protein, but it's still an issue there for most people. The other problem that I have is that protein is the food that we are getting most of our nutrients. So if you go several days without eating any protein, any calories at all, you're not really getting any nutrients in that time, and that can muck with your hormones. And my last problem is that when you do break that fast, most people will tend to binge without even realizing it, because you are kind of so hungry and your body is looking for those nutrients that it hasn't had for several days, that you're just more likely to overeat and almost undo what you did for the last few days not eating. So I'm not a fan of extended fasts like that. Time restricted eating is better because you're just not snacking between meals, so that's great for other things like autophagy, and that's why we put that in the EM. The difference between fat cycling and fasting in that case is that when you are fat cycling, you're still keeping your macronutrients like your protein coming in. So you're still eating protein. You're just manipulating the amount of fat that you're eating per day. So as I said, where it's useful is that on the days that you are having a low amount of fat, it takes a lot less time for you to be able to tap into what you have stored on your body, because essentially you're bringing less fat in, so you have less fat to work through, and basically you tap straight into your fat. But you don't want to do that every single day constantly for months and months on end, because as I said, that is going to eventually slow our metabolism down. So you will strategically have days where you eat more fat so that your body goes, oh no, I have more calories, so I need to increase those enzymes. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to set up as a system where you would do, say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It doesn't have to be exactly this, but you want to have a couple of days a week where you are having a lower fat level for the obvious reasons, as I said, so you can tap more quickly into what you have stored. And then in between those days, you're going to have a slightly higher fat level. So let's say you have Monday, Wednesday, Friday where you eat a little bit leaner. What does that mean? Well, essentially you're just choosing slightly leaner meats. You might choose something like a ground beef as opposed to ribs, or a sirloin steak with slightly less fat, or an eye fillet as opposed to something like ribs. That's just bringing down your fat level, and you're just not adding extra fat. So you don't have to go zero fat, obviously, and you in fact don't really want to. And then on the in-between days where, say, you've got Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, where you're just going to increase that fat level a little bit. Again, it means you might have a slightly fattier choice of meat, or you might be adding a little bit of fat via the cooking fat that you have, a little bit of butter, a bit of cheese, things like that. And that's useful because on the lower fat days, as I said, you're going to tap more into your body fat very quickly. And then on the days in between where you're increasing your fat level, you're increasing those enzymes. But then the next day again, you're going to drop your fat level. On top of that, you have more enzymes now. So you're essentially just manipulating it in a up and down sort of cycle. Now, the amount of fat that you manipulate is going to depend on your activity level. It's going to depend on how much body fat you have, how tall you are, things like that. So if you need any help sorting that out, let me know. I don't really think you need to track it too much. It's just about more eyeballing how much you're eating each day, and just changing your fat levels between, what type of meat that you choose. But essentially, as an example, you might be doing on your lower fat days somewhere around 80 grams of fat, whereas opposed to on the days where you're having a higher fat, you might be having more like 100 to 120 grams of fat that day. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. But yeah, it's something that I think is very, very useful.